The sound of shattering glass cut through the silence like a scream. Kathy Voss stopped breathing. Her Louboutin heels hovered above the polished floor, every nerve in her body suddenly alive with the primal understanding that something was catastrophically wrong. The corridor stretched endlessly before her, antiseptic and cold under the hum of fluorescent lights. At the far end, her office door hung open, a dark mouth waiting to swallow her whole. She'd locked it. She always locked it. Her hand moved instinctively toward the handle, toward whatever danger waited inside, when suddenly the world tilted sideways. A calloused hand clamped over her mouth, an arm like steel wrapped around her torso, yanking her backward into the shadows with such force her phone skittered across the floor. Terror shot through her veins. Every self-defense class, every moment of carefully constructed control shattered as she thrashed against her attacker. Then came the voice, rough and desperate, breathing urgency into her ear. "If you go in there, you're dead. Trust me." Kathy Voss was 25 years old when the world handed her an empire she never asked for. Voss Global, the financial behemoth her father had built from nothing, managed portfolios worth $30 billion. When Marcus Voss collapsed at his desk, dead before the paramedics arrived, Kathy had been backpacking through Southeast Asia, trying to figure out who she was beyond her last name. The board recalled her immediately. The media couldn't get enough of the story. The reluctant heiress, the girl with her father's ruthless intelligence and her own dangerous charisma. They called her the Ice Queen of Finance, and she learned to wear the title like armor, even though it made her feel like she was suffocating. What no one knew, what she would never admit, was that every decision terrified her. Every late night she spent in that tower was an attempt to outrun the certainty that one day everyone would discover she was just pretending to know what she was doing. After midnight, Voss Global belonged to ghosts. The janitorial crew moved through the building like phantoms, invisible to people who mattered, people who looked through them as if they were furniture. Among those phantoms was Daniel Cross, 40 years old, raising a 10-year-old daughter alone because his wife had died asking questions no one wanted answered. Daniel worked nights so he could take Lisa to school every morning, so he could help with homework and make dinner and be the parent she deserved. But he'd been someone else once. 5 years ago, Daniel had been Voss Global's chief information security officer, a position he'd earned through brilliance and dedication. Then he'd discovered encrypted files being transferred to offshore accounts, client data hemorrhaging to competitors, a systematic theft that had all the fingerprints of an inside job. When he reported it, when he presented his evidence to Marcus Voss himself, he'd expected justice. Instead, he'd been escorted out by security while his colleagues watched in silence. The official story said he'd fabricated the breach to cover his own embezzlement. His reputation was destroyed overnight, his career reduced to ashes, his name poison in the industry. But Daniel hadn't disappeared. 6 months later, he'd returned wearing a different uniform, pushing a cleaning cart through the halls where he'd once commanded respect. Every night, he nodded to Kathy Voss as she passed him in the corridor, offered a quiet good evening that she never acknowledged. To her, he was invisible, just another piece of the infrastructure, as unremarkable as the security cameras or the water coolers. Tonight, that changed. Daniel had been monitoring the security feeds from a cramped maintenance room that smelled like burnt coffee and copper wiring when he saw them. 3 figures moving through the executive floor with military precision, carrying equipment cases, their movements coordinated and purposeful. His fingers flew across the keyboard, pulling up system logs, and his stomach dropped. The last 20 minutes of footage had been erased, scrubbed clean as if those men had never existed at all. Someone with high-level access had done this. Someone who knew the system intimately. He grabbed his master keys and ran, his heart slamming against his ribs like a caged animal. He had to reach her. He had to stop Kathy from walking into whatever trap had been set. When Daniel saw Kathy step out of the elevator, striding toward her office with that unshakable confidence that powerful people wear like cologne, he didn't hesitate. His hand covered her mouth before she could scream, his other arm pulling her back into the alcove beside the emergency exit. She fought him with surprising ferocity, her elbow driving into his ribs hard enough to crack bone, her body twisting with the strength of someone who'd never learned to surrender. But he held on, his voice raw with urgency. "There are men inside your office. They're not here to rob you. They're here to destroy you." The sound of more breaking glass confirmed his words. Heavy footsteps, low voices coordinating. Kathy's eyes, wide with shock and fury and the first flicker of understanding, finally focused on his face. For the first time in 2 years of walking past him every single night, she actually saw him. Not the janitor, not the invisible man who cleaned up after her, but a human being with intelligent eyes and scarred hands and information that might save her life. When he finally released her, she pressed back against the wall, her voice coming out as a harsh whisper. "Who are you and why should I trust you?" Daniel kept his body between her and the hallway, listening to the sounds of systematic destruction coming from her office. "My name is Daniel Cross. I work the night shift here, and right now, I'm the only thing standing between you and whatever they've planned for you." Elena's mind raced, cutting through panic with the ruthless logic that had made her successful. Corporate espionage wasn't theoretical in her world. Hostile takeovers happened every day. But this felt surgical, personal. Someone had studied her patterns, knew exactly when she'd be vulnerable. She reached for her phone, then remembered it was lying somewhere in the hallway, probably already discovered. "We need to call building security immediately," she said, her voice steadier than her hands. Daniel shook his head. "The entire security system has been compromised. Someone with administrative access disabled it remotely, wiped the logs. Whoever orchestrated this knew exactly what they were doing." "How could you possibly know that?" "Because 5 years ago I designed these systems. I was your father's chief information security officer before he destroyed my career to protect the real criminals." The words detonated between them like a bomb. Elena stared at him, recognition flickering across her face. She'd seen his name buried in old personnel files during her first months as CEO. Daniel Cross, terminated with extreme prejudice, flagged as a security threat who'd made fraudulent accusations against senior management to cover his own theft. She'd never questioned it. Her father's judgment had been absolute, and she'd accepted it without a second thought. Daniel watched the realization dawn in her eyes, followed by something that looked uncomfortably like shame. "I've read your file," she said quietly. "It stated you were mentally unstable, that you'd manufactured evidence to hide your own crimes. Every single word was a carefully constructed lie. I found proof that someone in your father's inner circle was selling proprietary client data to foreign buyers. When I presented my evidence, I became the scapegoat. They buried me to save themselves." Elena felt ice spreading through her chest. Why would my father be complicit in that? Maybe he genuinely believed their version. Maybe he was protecting the company's reputation. Or maybe, Daniel's voice dropped to something almost gentle. He knew exactly what was happening and chose the company's stock price over the truth. Before Elena could process that betrayal, they heard voices growing closer, footsteps approaching with purpose. Daniel grabbed her wrist and pulled her toward the stairwell, moving with the fluid efficiency of someone who'd mapped every escape route in this building years ago. They descended 4 flights in tense silence, emergency lighting casting their shadows long and distorted against concrete walls, until they reached a maintenance corridor Elena hadn't known existed. "This accesses the backup server rooms," Daniel explained, producing a worn keycard. "We can bypass the compromised primary system, see exactly what we're dealing with." The server room felt like the inside of a machine, cold and humming with electronic life, rows of blinking equipment casting everything in blue light. Daniel sat at a terminal that looked ancient and began typing with the kind of speed that spoke of deep familiarity, muscle memory from another life. Within 3 minutes, he'd bypassed the disabled primary network and accessed the backup surveillance feeds. What Elena saw on the screen stopped her heart. The footage showed 2 men in tailored suits moving through her office with surgical precision. They weren't stealing. They were planting. Documents slid into her desk drawers. Files uploaded to her computer. A small device, unmistakably a listening bug, attached beneath her desk. Then one man deliberately swept a glass sculpture off her shelf, creating the sound of breaking glass they'd heard, staging a break-in that would be discovered in the morning by security. "Why frame me?" Elena breathed, though part of her already knew. Daniel pulled up older footage, dates going back weeks. Because someone wants you removed from Voss Global. And they need it to look justified, like the board had no choice. The video showed a man Elena recognized with sickening clarity. Lawrence Brennan, her father's oldest friend, the godfather who'd bounced her on his knee as a child, currently serving as vice chairman of Voss Global's board. He stood in a parking garage, handing the same two men who just ransacked her office what looked like building access cards and a thick envelope that could only be payment. Elena felt reality tilt. Everything she'd believed about her world suddenly suspect. Lawrence had stood beside her at her father's funeral, had promised to guide her through the challenges of leadership. He'd mentored every major decision she'd made in 3 years, always supportive, always there with sage advice. He'd been the one who'd called her 2 hours ago, claiming she'd forgotten critical documents for tomorrow's emergency board meeting. Documents she now understood had never existed. He orchestrated this entire thing, she said, her voice hollow. He knew I'd come back tonight. He sent me directly into this trap. Daniel nodded, his expression grim. And my guess is those planted documents connect you to financial fraud. Maybe fake embezzlement, maybe unauthorized trades. By morning, the board will have enough ammunition to force you out immediately. Brennan takes over as acting CEO, and whoever's paying him gets control of Voss Global. Who benefits? Follow the money. There's probably a buyer who's been trying to acquire this company for years. Brennan delivers it on a silver platter, and he retires very wealthy. Elena sank into a metal chair, the full weight of it crushing her. 3 years of brutal work, of sacrificing everything to prove she deserved her position, all of it built on foundations that were rotting from the inside. And worse, far worse, was the realization that her father had been part of the rot. He'd known Daniel was innocent. He'd known corruption was eating the company alive. And he'd chosen silence. Daniel watched her carefully, recognizing the exact moment when someone's carefully constructed world shatters and must be rebuilt from fragments. I understand what you're feeling, he said quietly. When they fired me, when they systematically destroyed everything I'd built, I wanted to burn this entire building to the ground. Then why didn't you? Because Maya was 5 years old and needed her father more than I needed revenge. And because my wife believed that the only way to honor truth was to stay close enough to expose it when the moment came. Elena looked up sharply. Your wife? She worked here in the forensic accounting division. After I was fired, she continued investigating quietly, pulling the threads I'd started unraveling. Daniel's voice went flat, the emotional distance of someone who'd told this story so many times it became script. 3 months after my termination, there was an explosion in the lower server room. They called it an electrical malfunction, faulty wiring that sparked a catastrophic fire. 3 people died, including my wife, Sarah. The room tilted. Elena remembered that incident. She'd been completing her MBA when it happened, absorbed in her studies while her father's company murdered 3 people. That wasn't an accident, she said, not a question. Daniel pulled up maintenance logs, his fingers steady despite the tremor in his voice. Someone deliberately sabotaged the electrical systems in that room, knowing exactly when Sarah would be there doing late-night audit work. It was murder, and your father helped orchestrate the cover-up because the truth would have invited federal investigations, exposed the data theft, tanked the stock price. Everything they'd killed to hide would have come to light. So they buried my wife and the evidence together, paid settlements to the families, and everyone moved on. Tears burned down Elena's face, hot and ashamed. She'd spent 3 years trying to honor her father's legacy, trying to be worthy of the empire he'd built. Now she understood that empire was a mausoleum built from lies and corpses. I'm so sorry, she whispered. I didn't know. I should have asked questions, should have investigated, but I just trusted that he'd done everything right. You were his daughter. Trust is what children give their parents. But now you know the truth, and you have to decide what kind of person you're going to be. Elena wiped her face, something hardening in her chest like steel forged in fire. She looked at Daniel, this man who'd lost everything because he tried to do the right thing, who'd spent 5 years working as a janitor in the building where his wife had been murdered, waiting for the chance to finish what she'd started. Why did you save me tonight? she asked. Why not just let me walk into Brennan's trap? Let him take over and walk away clean? Daniel was quiet for a long moment. Because Maya asked me once why I still come to this building every night. She wanted to understand why I work at the place that destroyed our family. I told her that sometimes the only way to make sure someone's death mattered is to finish what they started. Sarah died trying to expose the truth. I won't let that be meaningless. And you think I can help finish it? I think you're the CEO, which means you have access and authority I'll never have again. And more importantly, I think you actually want to do the right thing, even when it costs everything. That's rare in people with power. Elena reached across the terminal and took his hand, calloused from years of manual labor, strong and honest. I need your help, she said. Tomorrow I'm going to expose all of this publicly. Every lie, every cover-up, everything my father did and everything Brennan is attempting. But I can't do it alone. You're going to lose everything, Daniel said. The company, your reputation, your freedom if Brennan's lawyers are competent. I know, Elena said, and her voice didn't waver. But I'd rather lose everything standing for truth than keep everything built on murder. They worked through the night, copying files and constructing their case with the precision of lawyers preparing for war. Daniel showed her how to access encrypted folders her father had hidden, insurance files and settlement agreements, and internal communications that proved he'd known about Sarah's murder and had actively participated in covering it up. Each new piece of evidence shattered another memory, another piece of Elena's childhood, until the pedestal where she'd placed her father crumbled to dust. As dawn painted the sky in shades of amber and rose, Elena looked at Daniel with exhausted determination. Why are you really doing this? After everything my family destroyed, why help me? Because you're not your father, Daniel said simply. You're choosing to be better, and that requires more courage than most people possess. I want Maya to grow up believing that good people can still win sometimes. And maybe I need to believe it too. Elena stood and walked to the window, looking out over the city beginning to wake, millions of people starting their days with no idea that in a few hours, she would detonate a bomb that would destroy everything she'd built. Will you stand beside me? She asked. When I make the announcement, when the world learns what happened here. Where else would I be? Elena smiled, sad and grateful and terrified. Then let's tear down everything that's broken and build something that isn't. The symbol of rebirth stood before them. Two people from opposite sides of the same tragedy, finally united in purpose. Outside, the city gleamed with possibility. Inside, they prepared to set fire to their old lives and walk through the flames together. The press conference Elena called was held in Voss Global's atrium. Cameras from every major network pointed at her as she stood behind a podium, Daniel and Maya seated in the front row. Her hands trembled, but her voice carried clear and strong. 3 years ago, I inherited this company believing I was honoring my father's legacy. Today, I'm here to tell you the truth about that legacy, regardless of the consequences. She detailed everything with surgical precision. The data breaches Daniel had discovered, the cover-up that led to his wrongful termination, the server room explosion that had murdered Sarah Cross and 2 others, the recent attempt by Lawrence Brennan to frame her as part of a hostile acquisition scheme. She presented video evidence, documentation, forensic analysis, all of it methodically compiled and impossible to dismiss as conspiracy theory. When she finished, chaos erupted. Reporters shouted questions over each other. Brennan's attorney stood screaming about defamation and litigation. Security had to physically prevent several board members from storming the stage. But Elena stood firm, her eyes finding Daniel in the crowd, drawing strength from his unwavering presence. In the days that followed, the fallout was apocalyptic. Lawrence Brennan was arrested on multiple felony charges. The board attempted to force Elena out, claiming she'd brought catastrophic scandal to the company. Shareholders filed lawsuits demanding her immediate removal. Her face appeared on every business publication with headlines screaming the CEO, who destroyed her own company and Voss daughter betrays her father's memory. But other headlines emerged too, quieter but powerful. The whistleblower CEO who chose truth over billions. The woman who refused to stay silent. A new model of corporate accountability. Elena appeared before the board one final time, not as someone seeking their approval, but as someone who'd already made peace with her decision. My father built Voss Global on intelligence and ambition, she told them, her voice resonating across the conference room. But somewhere in the pursuit of profit, we forgot that our greatest responsibility isn't to quarterly earnings. It's to the people whose lives we impact, whose trust we hold, whose futures depend on our choices having integrity. An older board member who'd worked with her father for 20 years leaned forward. Integrity doesn't generate shareholder value, Miss Voss. Perhaps not, but it allows you to look in the mirror. And right now, how many of you can honestly claim your conscience is clean? The silence was profound. Elena placed an envelope on the table. I'm resigning as CEO effective immediately, but I'm not walking away from responsibility. I'm restructuring my controlling shares into a foundation dedicated to corporate transparency and supporting families harmed by corporate negligence. The people my father hurt, the people Brennan tried to hurt, they deserve more than settlements and silence. They deserve justice. You don't have the authority, someone protested. It's your inheritance. It's my choice. And I'm using it to ensure that what happened to Sarah Cross, to Daniel, to countless others, never happens under this company's name again. She looked at Daniel, standing near the back with Maya's hand in his. I'm also funding independent forensic audits of every suspicious incident in Voss Global's history. Every settlement, every convenient accident, every person who was silenced to protect our reputation. We're going to illuminate every dark corner. And if that destroys us, then we deserve destruction. The board erupted in outrage and threats, but Elena gathered her things and walked out, Daniel and Maya falling into step beside her. As they left the building that had defined her entire life, Maya tugged on Elena's sleeve. Are you scared? The girl asked with the brutal honesty only children possess. Elena knelt to her eye level. Terrified, she admitted. But sometimes doing what's right means losing what you thought you wanted, only to discover what you actually needed. What did you need? The truth. And friends brave enough to stand in it with me. The transformation of Voss Global into the Integrity Foundation took 8 months of brutal legal warfare and restructuring. Stock prices plummeted. Major clients fled. Half the executive team resigned rather than face the audits Elena had commissioned. But slowly, impossibly, something unexpected emerged from the wreckage. Employees who'd been silenced for years came forward with their own stories. Families who'd lost loved ones to corporate negligence found their voices amplified rather than suppressed. Foundation with interest. Elena and Daniel worked side by side, designing new systems built on accountability rather than secrecy. He taught her about ethical security architecture and protecting whistleblowers. She taught him about navigating corporate structures with integrity intact. They made an unlikely team, the disgraced CEO and the janitor turned security expert, but they made it work better than anything either had built before. One evening, as they sat in their modest new office overlooking a park instead of a skyline, Elena turned to Daniel. Do you ever regret it? Helping me that night? You could have let Brennan win, disappeared, and been free of all this. Daniel smiled slightly. Sure, but you'd be destroyed, and the truth would still be buried. Besides, Maya says you taught her that powerful people can also be good people. That's worth more than being free of it. Elena felt tears threatening. I'm not sure I qualify as powerful anymore. Broke, disgraced, and unemployable in most of the business world. Power isn't about wealth or titles, Daniel said. It's about having the courage to use whatever influence you possess for something that matters. By that measure, you're the most powerful person I've ever known. They sat in comfortable silence, watching Maya play in the park below, her laughter floating through the open window. Elena thought about everything she'd lost, the company, the reputation, the life of privilege and prestige. Then she thought about what she'd gained, peace of mind, genuine purpose, and people who saw her not as the CEO or the heiress, but as someone trying, imperfectly but honestly, to do better. Daniel, she said quietly, thank you for covering my mouth that night, for forcing me to stop long enough to see the truth. Thank you for having the courage to listen. Most people don't, especially when the truth is expensive. I'll keep listening. To you, to Maya, to everyone whose voices were stolen. That's the only way we build something worth having. As darkness settled over the city and lights began to sparkle across the skyline, they remained there together, two people who'd met in crisis and discovered in each other the strength to choose truth over comfort, justice over convenience, and integrity over everything else. 18 months after the press conference that destroyed her old life, the Integrity Foundation had transformed from controversial experiment into revolutionary model. Elena and Daniel co-directed the project from a Brooklyn office that was 1/10 the size of her old corner suite and felt infinitely more spacious. Maya was flourishing, her artwork covering every wall, her homework spread across the conference table more often than actual work documents. She'd started calling Elena Aunt Elle, a nickname that made Elena's heart clench with gratitude every time she heard it. On Christmas Eve, as snow fell in thick white curtains over the city, Maya presented Elena with a small wrapped gift decorated with crayon drawings. Elena unwrapped it carefully, finding a simple bracelet with a charm engraved with words that broke her. "Thank you for saving my dad." Elena's voice shattered as she pulled Maya into a fierce hug. "Sweetheart, I think your dad saved me." Maya pulled back, her expression serious. "Dad says you saved each other. That's how real families work." "Real families," Elena repeated softly, looking up at Daniel. "Yeah, I think that's exactly right." They stood together by the window, watching snow transform the city into something clean and new. Inside, former Voss Global employees worked alongside people the company had harmed, building something unprecedented together. Daniel moved closer to Elena, close enough that she could feel his warmth. "Do you miss it? The power, the prestige, the corner office with the city at your feet?" Elena considered the question with complete honesty. "Sometimes I miss feeling like I had all the answers. But that was always an illusion. I was just as lost as everyone else, maybe more so because I thought being CEO meant being certain about everything. And now I'm comfortable with not knowing, with asking for help, with admitting I'm still figuring it out." She smiled at him. "Your wife was incredibly wise, by the way. What she said about the right people entering your life exactly when you need them. Sarah had a gift for seeing truth even when it wasn't obvious yet," Daniel said softly. "For years after she died, I thought I'd exhausted my chance at having good people in my life, that losing her meant living in that loss forever." His voice dropped lower, intimate. "But having you and Maya in my life, building this foundation together, I'm starting to believe she was right. That the people we need find us when we're finally ready to see them." Elena turned to face him fully, her heart racing. "Daniel, I need you to understand that being part of your lives, part of Maya's life, has meant more to me than anything I accomplished at Voss Global. I was suffocating in that tower, dying under the weight of expectations and lies. You gave me permission to breathe again. You did that yourself," he said, his hand reaching up to cup her face gently. "I just happened to be there to catch you when you finally jumped." They stood like that, the space between them charged with possibility and promise, until Maya called out asking for help with a decoration, and the moment passed but the feeling remained. That night, they celebrated with the foundation staff, an impromptu office party with donated food and laughter that echoed off the walls in ways the old corporate offices never had. Elena felt something she'd never experienced in her previous life. She felt home, not the home of her childhood, shadowed by her father's impossible expectations and darker secrets, but a home she'd built herself with people who saw her clearly and chose her anyway. Daniel caught her eye across the room and raised his paper cup in a silent toast. Elena raised hers in return, acknowledging everything they'd survived and everything they were becoming together. Outside, snow continued to fall, covering the city in white, erasing old footprints and creating space for new ones. Inside, surrounded by people who'd chosen truth over comfort and community over isolation, Elena finally understood what her father had never learned. Real power wasn't about control or dominance or building empires that lasted centuries. It was about having the courage to burn down what was broken and plant something better in the ashes. It was about choosing people over profit, integrity over image, and love over legacy. The Integrity Foundation's wooden sign swayed gently in the winter wind, its message carved deep, for those who choose to tell the truth. Inside, Maya added finishing touches to her artwork, a family portrait showing herself, her father, and Elena standing together. Behind them, sketched in silver crayon so she looked like she was made of light, a woman with kind eyes watching over them all. Sarah Cross, Daniel's wife, Maya's mother, the woman whose death had catalyzed all of this. Sometimes, Maya said, studying her drawing with surprising wisdom, the people we lose don't really disappear. They just change into the reasons we do better. Daniel put his hand on his daughter's shoulder, his eyes meeting Elena's across the room. Out of the mouths of children, Elena thought, they see the truth we spend our whole lives trying to uncover. That night, as they locked the office and walked through snow-covered streets, Elena linked her arm through Daniel's while Maya ran ahead making footprints in the fresh powder. Sometimes the person who stops you from going inside isn't blocking your path. They're the only one trying to save your life. And sometimes, if you're extraordinarily lucky, they save more than that. They save who you were always meant to be. If you believe stories like this need to be told, leave a comment and subscribe to Whispers of Light. We tell the stories that refuse to be forgotten.